Have you got questions after seeing Weapons? You want to know more about Gladys, the metaphors, the symbolism, what the heck that weapon in the sky was? Well, I got answers for you. And honestly, some of these are very surprising. Today we're going to do a deep dive breaking down the entire film. Metaphors, symbols, I've got them all covered, time-coded. Let's get into it. Spoiler alert. We've got to start with some groundwork because while Weapons has sparked many comparisons, its influences are actually quite broad. The obvious theatrical inspiration is Magnolia, which Zach Cregger has cited about in multiple interviews, especially with the character of the cop, Paul. Zach Cregger, of course, is the writer and director of Weapons, and he told Letterboxd in an interview, Magnolia, masterpiece, epic, all these different characters interacting, spiraling around one weird central miracle. I love it. John C. Reilly's mustache, put it in the movie. Eldon is wearing it. It's like I fashioned Eldon after John C. Reilly in that movie, you know? I've seen a lot of people talking about Picnic at Hanging Rock, the Australian classic, but I find, although it is about missing schoolgirls, it's more of a dreamlike, although Weapons does have dream sequence, it's more dreamlike and surrealist, where Weapons tries to ground itself in realism. For me, just because it is about schoolgirls going missing doesn't mean it is a direct inspiration, but a huge inspiration that he has spoken about is The Shining. He credits The Shining for its hypersensitivity to the subject. I think you can draw a lot of parallels between Danny and Alex's character, but he also draws the narration opening of the film from Streetwise and Days of Heaven. The last inspiration that I thought was really important to talk about today is Prisoners, which when it was first mentioned in interviews, I was very confused by, but it makes perfect sense. If you haven't seen the film, it is absolutely brilliant. It's a drama thriller about children who go missing, and it's set in a suburban town. I find that Archer's character parallels one of the fathers in Prisoners, especially Hugh Jackman's character, Keller Dover, who becomes desperate for answers and crosses many boundaries and lines. But it wasn't just the desperation. The film took a lot of inspiration from the cinematography of the movie. Cregger and his cinematographer studied Prisoners, watching it together, and tried to capture the emotional loss in a suburban mystery with a realistic design, all lived in sets. Cregger talks about how all of the houses in Prisoners are quite messy, and he replicates this in Weapons to have it grounded in reality. And lastly, Cregger also cites the trailer, just the trailer for Needful Things. In the Letterboxd interview, he talks about how he wanted to see the movie Needful Things, but it didn't quite deliver. The expectations versus reality are a little bit different for that one, but a lot of the film, the mood board of it was set on the trailer for Needful Things, the mystery of it all in a small suburban town. But these influences do not explain the subject matter of Weapons, which is far more personal, and maybe more personal than Zach Cregger wants to believe himself. I found some conflicts within his own statement. So before becoming a horror director, Cregger was best known for The Whitest Kids You Know, and this was a comedy group that he co-founded with Trevor Moore and Sam Brown. In 2021, Moore died suddenly, and this is a death that Cregger says he's still trying to digest. Speaking to Polygon, he said that chapter of my life was terrible. Writing the movie was just me kind of interacting with those feelings in a way that wasn't self-destructive. He called the process a psychological triage, channeling his grief into characters and feeling the emotions I'm feeling and letting them go kind of crazy and bounce off each other and do everything I can't do. Guided by his belief incorporating what you get from your subconscious into your art, Cregger shaped the film into a kind of tribute for Moore, but also for the painful grief he was going through. Which is interesting because I found the film to be completely detached from emotion, especially in the first act. We go straight from the disappearance of these children, and outside of them gathering at the school and the parents really laying into Justine, we go into Justine's side of things. And it's not until Archer's section of the film that we really get into the emotional nitty-gritty. That separation really stood out to me because usually in horror, these events create emotional panic, but they move straight past it. The film isn't in essence about the children's disappearance, but it's about what it kicks off. But I feel like this also echoes how grief in real life can be. If you've ever lost anyone, you know how strange it is that the world just keeps turning when something so dear to you has left. That realism in this strips away all of the Hollywood dramatics, showing how people have to live, they have to move on, even straight after a great tragedy, until they eventually deal with that and realize it has become a part part of them. And that is one of the elements I loved about this film. The fact that it wasn't trying to milk the disappearance, but instead build a story about what happens, the reactions around it. But before you think that the film is purely about grief and loss, you would be wrong. Because Zach Cregger's told the Witch YouTube channel that just because the film came from processing his own feelings, he doesn't want people to see Weapons as a movie about grief. He touched on, or really kind of gave a little bit of shade to, horror movies that keep talking about grief and trauma. In his word, he said he's so over it. Well, I actually don't think he is, because here is where things get very interesting. Craig has said that the final chapter of this film is deeply autobiographical, flipping the parent-child caretaking dynamic. He says in an interview that he grew up around alcoholics, and this is why he was drawn to expressing the idea of the child caring for the parent. So we see this in the soup scene, or really all of Alex's section where he has to fend for himself. It's interesting because Zach Cregger wants to move away from this film being about trauma or grief, but that is exactly what he's put into it, reframing his own childhood in a horror movie. And obviously this becomes the saddest part of the story, especially with Alex when he has to hug his, oh my gosh, don't get sad. When he has to hug his parents goodbye at the end. He's forgiven them, he's taken care of them, and now he has to live without them. In the school scene earlier in the film where we see the parents attack Justine, there's an interesting piece of dialogue, and I didn't get it quite down. I tried, but I've lifted it from the draft script. So it is like this, but it may not be word for word in the final film. The school staff states there's no right or wrong way to grieve. We might experience emotions that we don't like, emotions besides sadness. It's important not to judge ourselves when we feel emotions like anger. Anger is a very healthy part of the grief cycle, and this is the part I want you to think about. It can be especially powerful in instances of abandonment. I feel like this shows the connection between these two things, the alcoholism, the parent-child dynamic, but then also the grieving. It's about how to get through grief and how Alex may feel grief as well, not because of his classmates disappearing, but because he feels abandoned by his parents. In the film, they are no longer themselves, and that is because in the writer's mind, they have succumbed to addiction, leaving him feeling abandoned as a child. But I do think it's important to lay down some groundwork talking about how interesting it was to see Cregger open up way more about his process in writing Weapons during the press run compared to Barbarian. There's been a lot of talk about how comedians make this grand transition into horror movies. He said to Collider about horror that the budgets are not extravagant and you're able to be a little risky. I think it's one of the few theatrical avenues right now where you can be surprised. And I think it's sort of a shame that our theatrical landscape is kind of limited in that way to big action extravaganzas and then horror. And then there's not much room for anything else. My creative tuning fork tends to resonate the strongest with horror. This is my natural sweet spot, so I'm lucky in that way, but God forbid my natural sweet spot was a romantic comedy or zany comedy. I think I'd be in a little bit more trouble or have to find other avenues. I think that's really interesting when we talk about the tonal work, which is an issue that people do find within his movies, people who don't gel with them. I love the tonal shifts within his movies, but it is something that also comes up with Jordan Peele's work, so it's interesting to know the kind of thought pattern behind why horror, for comedians, of course. I also thought it was really interesting hearing about his production planning, more so when he's getting ready to actually shoot. He's very pedantic about his editing structure and he has a focused vision. He says not much changes at all from his original storyboard to the final cut. He said that he's already come up with all of the storyboarding for the upcoming Resident Evil film that he's working on, and basically the film is done because he has it all laid out. He likes to visit the locations early and go through and do any creative process with the camera department then. This keeps the budget in check and avoids any problems that may come about while they're actually on set with the talent. He likes this because he says his creativity can go wild at that point and he doesn't have any pressure or time restraints. He did say though 2 or 3 scenes did get cut from Weapons, but they weren't that important. It was because of pacing and he felt like it was a bit redundant explaining things that we have already seen. So I don't think we missed any answers in any of these scenes that were cut. But writing wise, he borrows a lot from Lynch. He enters the meditative state and becomes the antenna for ideas. This is something that David Lynch has spoken about, the late and great David Lynch. He used to have the same process. And when Cregger wrote Weapons, he wrote it from the start to the end, not even knowing what the twist was, what the reveal was. He said that he didn't come up with the answer of why they disappeared until halfway through. And this is where audiences split on the reveal. I've seen a lot of chatter about this. I want to know personally, do you prefer to be breadcrumbed all the way through with the clues to solve the mystery if you look hard enough, or do you want to just go in blind and be taken along, dragged along for the journey? Some found the reveal too messy or random. Personally, I went into it thinking it was about aliens. But when the word witch appears on the car, I think that's brilliant, and having that in plain sight, or really red paint. I feel like there's a fine line with a film being smart enough to mislead you in plain sight. Films like Sixth Sense or Fight Club, and in horror it can be even more tricky because people have expectations of what kind of subgenre they like and what they deem to be great. I've seen this a lot as well when the answer can be summed up to something supernatural. People do find it to be a cop-out sometimes, unless they're given the right clues. And horror is really clever in that because the supernatural unseen can have its own original lore or logic. The reason people turn to horror is because there's so much to explore and so much that you can do with it, and I can understand why with reveals or big mysteries in movies, how that can take away from the bigger picture for some audiences. Okay, Gladys, she gets her own section because I want to break down everything about her. Gladys is the strange, unsettling force at the middle of weapons, and the film thrives off the mystery around her, but I did find some answers. Vanity Fair revealed that Cregers gave the actress who played Gladys, Amy Madigan, 2 different ideas of what she could pick for an origin source, and he doesn't even know which one she went with. Quote, they were very different options, and I was like, you don't have to tell me, but it is either this or that. I don't know which one she picked. One is that she was a regular person, but her spells and corrosive actions are a last-ditch effort to heal herself of a life-threatening illness. In that scenario, he said she has to adopt this methodology that she uses out of place of emergency to keep herself alive. And I won't say any more than that. No, say more, say more. Vanity Fair said that the other option was that maybe she's not a person at all. The off-kilter red wig and outlandish makeup suggest that Gladys is some other kind of creature, trying to simulate what she thinks a normal human being looks like, but she's doing it very badly. And Kreger responded to that, that's an interesting way to think about it. I like it a lot. Although he did go on to say that I don't know the answer, but I love that I don't know the answer. I don't need to know the answer. So maybe she is a dying woman desperate to cure herself, or maybe she isn't human at all. And we have some clues that show maybe that could be the path. Costume designer Trish Somerville dressed Gladys in a look that Zegger called himself deranged grandma. He joked that the woman likely took the inspiration of how to dress from retirees, piecing together an outfit and thinking, this is what people wear, right? And then he said she definitely didn't plan it. Well, maybe that's the point. I think that this points at the fact that she is not human. For me, that is what he is saying without saying it. Because if she was a regular human, why would she just be putting clothes together and figuring it out on the fly? And we know she's on the fly because she makes some erratic choices. She explains to Alex when the ritual isn't going the right way or she's not healing to the full effect she wants to, that I hoped your parents would help, but it doesn't seem to be working out. So although she is desperate, I don't think she's human because of her costume, but I also don't think she's thinking anything through. She's making choices, making it up as she goes along. She's erratic and she's constantly grasping at straws. This is why she keeps making mistakes. This isn't a well thought out plan at all. And I know what a lot of you thought. She has a certain quality. She's familiar in a sense. Long legs. She looks like long legs. And to me, she has a strange essence of Bob Gray Pennywise. She's feeding off humans, benefiting from their downfall. Also, she's someone who could be older than humans themselves. The touch of consumption line has thrown people, and it threw the principal in the film. It's a very old saying, perhaps from the 1800s. And if she is from all the way back then, who knows how far back she goes. I don't think she's human. And her clothing and makeup seems like an attempt to fit in. She could really be Pennywise. I mean, if we wanted to take the theory that far, she could be somehow related to whatever, he is. She also seems to change her story about how she's related to the family. At first, she calls herself an auntie. Is she Alex's great aunt? Because she says that her baby sister is Alex's mum. But they also make it very apparent that Alex's mum doesn't know her very well. Although there are families like this, it's kind of strange she doesn't know her sister at all. When she first arrives at Alex's home, Alex's dad explains to him in the car that he doesn't think she'll be there for that long, maybe a month. And that is him putting a timestamp on how sick she is and how long he thinks that she has left. He says that she has nowhere to go. But of course, she doesn't come empty-handed. She brings a thorny potted tree, which is at the middle of all of the rituals, and she of course mixes her own blood with personal items to manipulate the people around her, feeding off their energy to restore herself. And we can see proof of this with her condition improving throughout the film. She's running around town by the end, and of course her hair growing back is a huge visual indicator. We also only see her mask drop twice, once when she threatens Alex over breakfast, saying that she can make his parents eat each other, which honestly for me was one of the most horrifying parts of the film, that threat. But then second, when Alex asks her if she gets better, will she leave, you can see she kind of cracks and gets sad, almost tearing up when she realizes that he doesn't want her around. Kreger notes Amy looks so hurt by the fact that he doesn't want her to stay in the house. Is that the real her? So although the origins of this character were put directly into the actor's hands to decide what she wanted to do with it, I think that there are a lot of tells that she is an ancient being. She doesn't look like she's of this world. Even if she was an ancient relative, I really do think that she has been able to manipulate her way into this circumstance. And Kreger remains in the group of what you don't know is much scarier and wants the mystery to remain around her. And we've seen this recently in films like Bring Her Back. The directors of that film also agree on this stance. It's the utilization of absent information that makes the story scarier in the dweller's mind. But let's break down some of the more specific elements of her character's craft. First, let's start with the bell that has a triangle and number 6, that's what it looks like, on it. From a witchcraft perspective, the inverted triangle on the bell could be a connection between the feminine principle, which in many cultures is a downward pointing triangle that resembles the shape of a womb, symbolizing fertility, creation, and an aspect of nature. But it also, in alchemy, represents water, which we know she uses a bowl of water during these practices. In neo-pagan and Wiccan traditions, it is associated with goddesses in various forms, particularly the mother and crone. And if you look up crone, there are images that look very hagsploitation, just like this film. The crone role is often associated with death, but it's also related to the circle of life, where death is seen as a necessary part of renewal or rebirth. The number 6 has been long associated with the devil, of course, 666. Together, the symbols might simply mark the bell's owner and purpose, which is a tool to carry out dark intentions. Where the tree that she brings into the house is likely a miniature or bonsai version of the black thorn. This picture is from the Museum of Witchcraft in Cornwall, which is actually where I'm from. And doesn't it look exactly like hers? During the time of paranoia and witch panic, it was believed that blackthorn wood was used by witches to make their staffs and wands. Blackthorns are also known to play a role in protective spells and rituals. These branches allow Gladys to weaponize people, and the possession begins after she rings the bell. Again, I do think that these are all meant to be mysterious, and they may be based on parts of mythology, folklore, or pagan beliefs, but there is meant to be an air of mystery around it. Okay, let's get into the nitty-gritty with symbolism, metaphors, and meanings. And let's start with the big one, the title of the film, Weapons. The title reflects the film's core themes and supernatural mechanics. On the surface, it refers to how characters in the story have become literal instruments of destruction under control of Gladys, who uses dark magic crafted by personal items and, of course, her little twigs, her thorny branches that we've just spoken about, and her own blood. And she uses this to bend people, or really to snap them to her will, people of the town and of course the children. These people are turned into living weapons, carrying out acts of violence as extensions of her. Beneath that, the title has a psychological meaning, suggesting how grief, trauma, and manipulation can be weaponized, used both against oneself and others. The film examines how tragedy can distort relationships and drive people into destructive patterns, such as alcoholism and witch hunts, whether through supernatural coercion or human impulse to harm as a way of coping. In an interview with Vanity Fair, Kreger stated that he intentionally kept the title opaque, explaining again that he prefers people to come up with their own explanations and interpretations of film. He loves the vagueness. We have come to accept this. It's also very similar to what David Lynch says, that you need to feel it and not try so hard to understand it, and everyone's interpretation is correct. I think it's very interesting, the word weapons and how the definition is used throughout the film. And I did pick up on Alex's dad giving him the name of Axeman as a nickname. Although cute, it does make me think of a weapon. And when Archer is trying to figure out why the children ran in that direction, he talks about their target as if they are a weapon. Speaking of, the feedback I got the most was questions about the giant gun in the sky during Archer's dream sequence. This was puzzling for some audiences, including myself, and on rewatching the film, I picked up on something I haven't seen other people talk about, but maybe quite obvious. In Archer's son's room, where Archer is laying down, where he has this dream sequence, directly across from him is a poster that features a gun, one that looks very similar to my eye as that weapon. I think along with the 2:17 that's on the clock, which is also a clock that appears in the bedroom, and this poster, I think it is his subconscious seeping in to where he is when he is looking for his son. He is looking for clues around the room. He is bringing together all of this in his mind when he is searching and desperate in this dream sequence for answers. And of course, being set in America, the disappearance of 17 children in a school and this weapon, a lot of people have pondered over the fact that this could be an allegory for school even if it is just a glimpse into the mind of a parent's worst fears. But Kreggers did say in an interview, I wasn't trying to comment or even tap into collective social tragedies. I was purely writing from a personal space. However, with art and especially storytelling, the individual is universal. So I'm more than happy if anyone relates to what I went through and what this film is examining, but I wasn't thinking, oh, America, at all. I was thinking, oh, Zach, which is of course his friend who passed away. So although some of the clues do lead towards that and our minds want to try and make sense of this mystery, I don't believe that was what was intended. But if that's what you took from it, it is a conversation worth having. Parasites is another repetitive theme that we find throughout the movie. We see this on the whiteboard of the classroom, but it feels very purposeful because we see this on the days leading up to the event, which happens in the opening narration, but also in the dream sequence of Justine. It is back on the board. I don't believe that that was the day they actually disappeared, that Parasite was written on the board. From what I recall in watching it a second time, it is actually on the days leading up to their disappearance. So why it's back on the board when she is rethinking her circumstance and trying to go through the mystery subconsciously, it seems very pointed. And then of course we have the principal who sits down with his partner, and on the TV is a documentary about cordyceps. Cordyceps is a genus of parasitic fungi, most notably for its species that infect insects and manipulate their behavior, which creates a, they say, zombie-like effect, which we see in the children. And at first that is physical. We see her hijack their minds and bodies and use them, bending them at her will, snapping them. She uses Alex's mum in one of the most terrifying scenes to crawl into the backseat of Justine's car. Did you guys hate that moment? It was so scary. And cut off some of her hair. But the way she moved, if you notice the way the mother moved in this moment, it is really similar to ants who have also succumbed to this fungus. But by the end, this moves as just a physical comparison to the parasite, and she becomes the actual definition. Her true nature is not just being a witch, but being a predator willing to drain the whole town to keep herself alive. I think that the hints to parasites throughout it are just that. They're clues, they're breadcrumbs into how she is controlling, but we're not too sure yet until we have all of the pieces. Another piece that people were curious about was the 2:17. For me, the 2:17 is us living in Archer's mind, because we are given this detail. It's on the tagline, it's on the poster, it was on the trailer. We don't know anything about the mystery yet, and we don't have any clues. So we are hooked. We are trying to find meaning and messaging in 2:17. Just like Archer is clinging to any scrap of truth about his missing son, looking for clues in posters, looking for it in footage, we are looking for it in the 2:17, and it comes to be revealed that that just happens to be the hour that Gladys does her spell. And she does it at this time or around 2 o'clock in the morning because she knows that the kids are going to be left alone, that they probably won't be in the same room as their parents during this time. And I think it just happens to be 2:17 by the time she goes downstairs, fills her bowl with water, and starts, winding up a twig. I did see that Kreger told Far Out magazine, I'm a Kubrick guy, and when it comes to The Shining, I definitely worship that movie. And I thought of changing it to 2:37. But then I was like, you know what? My first impulse has got to be the one I stick with. So I kept it at 2:17. Please let me know if you found a deeper meaning for this part of the film, but I do think it is just to show how our brains try to make sense of mystery. And I think it just sounds spooky. It's also very similar to the idea of the basement being in this movie, because if you have seen Barbarian, you know that that has a lot to do with a basement. And in this film, it is the reveal. I think that Kreger has put himself into a little pigeonhole with basements, but not entirely on purpose, just because of the aesthetic and the atmosphere it creates, along with A Time on the Clock, which a lot of horror fans have a feeling of connection or nostalgia to from watching movies where things have happened in the witching hour. As we've touched on, alcoholism and addiction is a huge dependency for the characters of this film. While the most explicit part is in the final chapter, where we have spoken about that Kreger explores the child-parental dynamic being flipped because of substance abuse, and the idea of the soup feeding, it is introduced actually a lot earlier with Justine's character. Justine's arc gives us a very honest depiction of relapse. We can assume that she has returned to drinking after the children's disappearance, but Kreger smartly shows it not as a single breaking point, but as a pattern of her downfall. Whenever she loses control of something within the film, so the town meeting or the meeting with the parents at the school does not go well, or she's trying to tell the principal what she saw in Alex's house and she is denied, she heads back to the liquor store. Even when she's attacked at the liquor store by Donna, her response is the same. We see her at home going down the hall, attempting to turn the light off in a very drunken state. On a side note, I am sad we didn't get Donna's story. That's the one I wanted. But it's Aunt Gladys's magical control over the town folk that mirrors this grip of addiction. It's an external force that warps identities, strips autonomy, and turns loved ones into unrecognizable versions of themselves. Gladys refers to this state as resting. And when she moves in, the house goes from this welcoming, bright, warm place with his whole family, with his mum telling him that he needs to clean his room, into this stale, cold, kind of panicked, closed-in environment, leaving Alex to fend for himself. We're seeing the progression of addiction through Justine's character, but we're also seeing the ramifications through Alex. And then we have James, who honestly is my favorite character in the whole film. We have him at the very start when he meets Justine. He is struggling. He's in a really dark place with his own addiction, and it's interesting to know that when they cross paths, she is just starting back up her own, or she is relapsing. It's a really sad moment when you think about it. He's asking her for money outside the liquor store, and his story ends up uncovering all of the mystery within this town. As you can see, there are so many different examples of addiction throughout this film. I also think that the film touches on the mental health of Archer's character in showing when he shows up for work and everything is going wrong. He's ordered the wrong color paint, which ends up being The Witch written on Justine's car, but it just seems like he cannot get himself together because he is suffering. He is able to channel that anger into looking for answers, but it doesn't mean what he's doing is healthy. I want to touch on some of my own personal theories about the film. The number one thing that I believe this film is about, or what it is about to me, is boundaries. Whether it's intended or not, Weapons really highlights the use of boundaries and what happens when we break them. Boundaries between the parents, the teachers, partners. Even the scene when Gladys goes to the principal's house, it's crossing a boundary and he keeps trying to tell her to leave. It's so inappropriate. And like the snapping of the twig, these boundaries that keep getting broken in the film are what progresses it along every single time. Like when Paul says, "Can I give you a hug?" because that is a boundary, a physical boundary that he has probably put up with his partner in crossing any relationship lines. He breaks that and then it's cut to them having adult time. Or when Sarah Paxton, who is the mother of one of the children, she is asked by Archer to see her ring footage and she says no, she is not comfortable with that. What does he do? He waits on the side of the road for Justin Long. Yes, I was going to mention it. Justin Long, nice little cameo here. He is not listed in the cast or crew. Such a fun little Easter egg for horror fans. But he arrives home and he's the father. And so Archer just asks him for the camera footage. And he says yes, crossing a boundary again. Paul asks James if he has anything that will poke him when he's going through his pockets. And this is pretty risky. It puts his health at risk by denying him of information he has asked for. But then what does Paul do? He breaks a boundary, a huge freaking boundary, punching James in the face. And a last example, even Alex crosses a boundary. Gladys puts down the salt and tells him not to cross it. She tells him her boundary and it's physical, and what does he do? He crosses it. I feel like each character is shown at their breaking point, possibly because of the pressures and desperation of the disappearance of the children and the spiraling reaction of crossing all of these boundaries. I also strongly read Justine's character as a discussion about witch hunting. She repeatedly says that people in the town are calling her a witch, and of course we see it written in blatant paint on her car, witch. But the thing that really calls me to this is when she leaves the school meeting at the start, it seems like an angry mob is following her out, and the way the camera tracks it from behind, it looks exactly like the stereotypical pitchfork fire town hall meeting before they go and find the witch. And the idea that her shady background comes up, it reflects on the idea of a witch hunt alone, which in definition is a campaign directed against a person or group holding views considered unorthodox or a threat to society. The town is afraid of the unknown, especially surrounding the mystery of what happened. Justine is a new teacher and they make her their scapegoat for this situation. But that's the interesting reveal, because there really was a witch, just not where they were looking.
You're barking up the wrong tree.
And then the last thing I think it's really important to touch on, and it's a perfect ending to this video, is the book ending of the movie, which I felt like was kind of lost in the beautiful end scene where we get to see Gladys completely torn apart by the children. I love that she threatened that she could make Alex's parents eat each other, and at the end of it all, they ate her. It was really a just desserts ending. But the film starts with an unseen narrator who is a child explaining what happened in their town. And this is key because they say, this really happened 2 years ago in my town. And the last shot of the film, we return to the narrator, who says all of the kids were returned to their parents and some even started talking again. And then it cuts to credits, but there's an eerie shot of one of the kids being held by their parent. And the idea that some of them started talking again and the narrator is talking 2 years later, I think that the narrator of the story was one of the children. And the sinister delivery of this makes me think that there may be still something within them creating this hive mind or some part of Gladys that lived on in their brain. That is a theory, definitely, but I just think it's such an interesting bookend to the movie where it's kind of ending, closing the chapter with what happens to her body, which is meant to snap the curse, but these kids don't go back to normal. The parents definitely didn't go back to normal. And the fact that the kids started talking again with the sinister ending feels like that something could carry on. Okay, that was, it's a stretch, but there is something there. There's something strange there. I could honestly talk about this film forever, and I will talk about it with you in the comments. I can't wait to hear all your thoughts, your feelings, your theories down below. Of course, all of my sources are linked. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. If you made it this far, just drop a bell emoji in the comments. I know what you're talking about, and I'm sure you do. Hopefully you won't summon anything too dark. Thank you to my patrons who allow me to make videos like this and spend so much time researching and trying to get you answers. And thank you to you watching. If you do like horror movies, dark cinema, and thrillers, I talk about them endlessly. Make sure to subscribe and I'll talk to you all very soon. Stay safe and stay spooky. Bye, friends.